Hey guys, Igor here once again with another video, and today I'm doing the somewhat requested water tutorial. I had a couple of people ask me, how do you draw water? I'm not exactly sure what type of water tutorial you guys want, but I will do my best in helping you out understanding how I apply water to my drawings. And let's get started with this stitch drawing that I did back in the day, right? So what we've got is a basic stitch drawing. Obviously you could see the couple of layers, and I'm gonna make them wet. So in order to do that, I want you guys to, you can apply this to many of your drawings, but I just want you to imagine how you can apply it to whatever drawing you might have, whether it's a soldier running on a beach, a kid playing with a water gun on a playground, or a creature drinking some water from the pond. So this part of the tutorial at least won't be the water drawing itself. So let's start with a new layer. And water, if you don't already kind of know, is it's a substance, right? So it reflects light, it casts shadow depending on what it's doing. So let's say his ears are wet. So the way that I would tackle this is, let me think about it. So yeah, I could start with a black color for the sketch layer of it, and I will show you kind of how the water would form around him. So typically, if I want to exaggerate the presence of water so that it's very visible, I would leave a thicker kind of casing around the edges. So here, let's say that this stitch is super small, right? If he was ant-sized, you could water molecules, you could see the barriers, or what would they be called? Just the edges of the water where where it holds on. So instead of like a spill on the floor, you would see giant droplets. So yeah, that's one way to think about it. But if this guy was giant, then instead of having this kind of thick portion right here between the ear and the outside of the water, you would just have the water be right over the ear, because he's so large that you can't see that curving little water. I don't know what it's called, the skin of the water, shoot, whatever. So here we have a wrapping around his ear. You can apply it however you want, have fun with it. It's going to be like a little bit of an ice cream melting type of thing, but we can also add a few droplets for added water effect. Now this is by no means the most definitive way of drawing water. This is how I do it. So you guys can totally use something like this, tweak it, do whatever you want with it. Have fun, most importantly. Honestly, it's pretty fun to draw water, and I hope that I can get that point across to you guys. And the longer you spend on it, most likely the better it'll look. So let's do another part where we've got water running down his ear. It's going to go into the cut and wrap up and grab onto that surface there, and then we're going to make this water drip. So I don't want to spend too long on this tutorial. I just want to draw out a couple of different water things and then kind of let you guys loose and do what you want. So we've got the sketch layer in place. Now before I add any sort of shadows and stuff, you keep in mind that water is a substance. So there's two ways of doing this, right? You can, let's say we just grab a bluish color. Everybody's like, oh, that's water. So you could use blue, but I'll show you that isn't the way that I do it. So let's say you just grab blue. Let's do this quicker. Let's grab the selection tool, go in. Oh, my hand is like, yeah, as you can see, not a perfect selection, whatever. Then you hit that, and then you hit fill, and it should fill in the selection. Then you just go and clean up the edges. So obviously a little bit faster than using a small brush stroke, pen, and trying to fill it all in. And then let's go down here. So on the leaves and foliage episode, I talked about light and transparency, and water, along with a few other substances, most of the time liquid is pretty transparent. Unless he was dipped in like Coca-Cola or oil, most of the time you could see what's behind the object or what's through it. So this right here, some people might argue, oh, that looks like water. Yay, let's leave it there. But not I. So what I want to do is we're going to show you two different processes for doing water. The top one will be step 1, and in step 1 what we would do is just lower the opacity, right? And this is the way that I don't do it. But let's lower the opacity to, I don't know, a good 30. Yeah, let's do like 30. Now we turn off the sketch layer, and we can kind of see where the water was. So another thing we could do is grab the eraser and go in. Again, remember, we have artificial zoom. Use it, but don't abuse it. It's kind of the motto with, I don't know, any computer tool that allows you to do something that you don't normally get to do with traditional. So we're using it to clean up a little bit of the edges, using the zoom to help us get straight strokes. And now we have our little water thing outlined. So the next step would be to create a layer under that. Grab this darker color in the ear and add some sort of light shadow. Remember, this water is a substance. It's just overlaying. Oh, my desktop just shut down, so if you guys can hear me clear, that's why. Alright, so we just drop a little bit of shadows, and then we're going to need a little bit of highlights, and this first step will be done. So again, the process goes as follows, right? You've got the sketch, then you fill in the body, lower the transparency, and then drop a light shadow, and drop a highlight on top of that. So the shadow, as you can see, is on the layer below that, but now we can combine it, create a new layer, because we want the highlights laying on top. Let's be cautious of where we put the highlights and how much highlights we put down. So the highlights, the way that you want to highlight water is, I think with this way, you could hit the edges. Let me undo the highlight on the inside. You could hit the edges and then hit kind of like some dots for the droplets. You can put in some highlights on the inside, space them out. Don't overdo it with the highlights, but add them to the point where you're digging how it looks. And then you can grab some in-between colors to soften your highlight. Again, we're going through, grabbing the highlight color, and you kind of work it until you get to a point that you're just, okay, I'm satisfied, right? So this would be, let's say, one of the ways that I would do water or liquid or soda. But this isn't really the way that I do it. I have a different approach, and it's one that takes longer, but most of the time yields a better result. So let's do that next. So here's our first water, and after I'm done with this, I will toggle on and off so you guys can judge for yourself which approach you like better. So let's toggle it off. We'll turn on the sketch layer once again and turn on our other fill. So this fill, I'm going to kind of spend a little bit more time cleaning it up, prepping it, because this is the way that I would do it normally. Let's take a little bit more off of the edge, the outline edges. Okay, so now, not only do we want to drop the shadow, but you have to keep in mind that water, the substance itself, has form. And if it's transparent, it would be casting shadows and highlights. on the inside too. And that's something that we didn't really do on the first thing right here. You can see we have shadow just underneath but not inside. So with this version, I'm going to lock the layer, and I'm actually going to grab some of this red. So instead of making this version have lower opacity, what I'm actually doing is painting in the lower opacity. So it's still a complete fill, but you will see what I mean. So we're grabbing this darker color, and we're going to go in along the bottom here. I'm going to bump up the brush size. And this approach works really well for not just water. It works, I would say it works even better for things like juice or a sticky, slimy substance. So just like before, where we added shadows on the outside, we're doing a similar approach, but the main difference being it's now being painted on the inside. And we're only hitting the bottom right because we have light coming from the top left. So the substance, in this case water, would be kind of thickest on the bottom right. It would have the most light would have to pass through it before you could see whatever's underneath it, and because of that it would be a little bit darker. Alright, so now what we do is I leave a little bit of the edge, the natural color. You could go back in with an intermediate color, kind of like one between the pink and the blue, and soften them up like that, like how I'm doing right now. Or you can do whatever you like. But yeah, basically that's normally how I would do it. And then let's just clean up some of these extra strokey areas. We're going to grab a large chunk of this intermediate color, so something in between the blue and the purple that we grabbed from the ear, and we're going to go ahead and soften the blue to show a little bit of that purple, because as soon as you start mixing those two colors, you're getting that transparency in there, right? Because what is the transparency? It's that blue that isn't showing as well over the pink. So that's sort of how we're lowering the transparency with our hand. Now the next step is to add the shadow outside of the water. So let's focus on the shadows first before we do any highlights. The highlights should make this thing pop, but right now the idea is to, again, lower the opacity. And another way of doing that quite nicely is grabbing more of the pink from the actual source. So whatever object the water is on, you would pick up some of its color. So we pick up some of this pink, boom, we go in towards the top, this time towards the top left instead of the bottom right, the top left of our object, and we fill in the water form with this lighter pink color. And you'll see after I zoom out, you'll see that it's now starting to look like the object is being seen through this blue color, thus allowing it to look like water. It's pretty straightforward. It's not a specific thing that I learned anywhere. It's kind of trial and error and using, I guess if I want to call it logic or common sense, but realistically there's no scientific approach or any kind of schooling behind my thought process, so it could very well be wrong. But I was kind of like, oh, the substance would be see-through, so it would pick up some of the color underneath. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab some of that underneath color. But yeah, now if I see, this part's still a little too dark, so let's grab more of this pink. And the more of the color from the object below is shown, the more transparent the liquid will be. So again, if you had oil on top of this guy, we would do most of the liquid in black, and there would basically be no color underneath, none of that pink underneath, to really indicate that this liquid's really thick. It's not transparent. It's very opaque, right? Okay, so now we've got the early stages. Let's grab some of this darker pink. You could probably, thinking about it now, we could probably use a mix of two styles to really speed up the process, but not only that, still get a really good result in the end. So here we created a new layer, and I'm actually going to go slightly over the water edges with this darker pink color because I want to soften them. It very much will depend on the brush you use. You know, if you have one of those really hard round brushes, the softening would be really hard to try and replicate, I guess, or try and make it look good. So the brush I'm using is a round brush. It's kind of one of those standards. Recently I've been using texture brushes and I like them, but this is something that I would say is pretty good for all levels, right? Anybody who's a beginner or who's used to Procreate and just wants to see how I apply my water, you know, this is it. We have the opacity turned all the way up, but you just don't push down very hard with your pencil. And if you're painting with your finger, you would be using a lower opacity, just doing a lot more strokes until you got the desired result. So here I'm grabbing a slightly darker pink and going along the edge here. Okay, now we need some highlights. Before we add highlights on top of or outside of the surface here, another thing to consider is grabbing some of that background color and going in along the edge here of this liquid to show that it's wrapping around the ear. And because it's wrapping around the ear, you could see through it much easier, since the only thing inside of that liquid is liquid itself, right? There's no ear within that area. So because of that, it would be a lot lighter. And let's do that, this whole part. And another way you can kind of indicate that this is the outer edge is with rim lighting. And we will do that in just a second. So here we're hitting the edge. Again, take this time to soften up the potential edge of this new highlight with the pink from the transparent water and the ear underneath it. Mix all those together to something smooth. I feel like on the left side you could still see a ton of blue. I don't want to go too small on the brush size because then it loses its softness and it becomes sort of like a pixel brush. Not good. So we turn it back on up to like 3%. Alright, so now we've got some highlights up in there. We can do the same thing down here. Remember, even though it's underneath the ear, it would still be pretty light due to a lot of light passing through that area. There's no ear in the way anymore. So don't be afraid to shade it a lot lighter. I'm going to grab the eraser. I'm going to have to go back in with a little bit of that blue on the bottom to help show the curvature of this water. Grab some of that background color again, sample it in the eyedropper, and keep going ham, going throughout the rest of this exterior. If you have slight scribbles that you see here, leave them. You know, it makes the surface, the water thing, feel more watery. We got to finish the outer shading. Grab a darker color for the ear again. So basically, the reason we do dark color near the bottom of the water and dark color on the inside is you see how now it makes it seem like the molecules are wrapping towards it. So it's dark on the inside because there's a lot of the surface there, and it's dark right below it because it's protruding outside of the ear, right? Hope that makes sense. It's really it's kind of easy for me to understand, you know, because of that's kind of how I've been trying to process it for a long time. So even if you know what I'm talking about, my explanation might be completely I don't know, completely bonkers to you. There's probably like, you know, like a really simple word for explaining it, and I have to go way out of my way explaining it like I'm writing some sort of essay. So yeah, we're just adding some darker color down there. Alright, I think we're ready for our highlights. So one more thing before the highlights, actually, I just noticed, is I want to show more of that ear, that bottom ear piece. And you could see as soon as I add this darker color, look at that. You can definitely tell that this liquidy stuff is very see-through. Let's grab some of the inner pink color from the top splatter of water. And you go through and add some more of that pink, and now we will grab the background color itself. It's not full white, so we could, if we wanted to, go even lighter. So if we do something like that, I might even try something pretty interesting here as well. So here we see we have a little bit of variation in you know how bright the highlights are, how often they show up, where they are. And to do that properly, I think you just have to kind of get a feel for painting wet objects like this. I wouldn't even consider myself an expert, you know. I don't paint specifically wet stuff very often, and if I do, it's very specific, I guess. So I haven't really developed a perfect system for where I should be adding highlights. The general rule is from the direction of the light. So here I'm going to grab a soft brush. We're going to lock this layer. I don't want to go beyond it. I'm going to lower the opacity, even though I could control it with my pen. And yeah, that's probably it. Just add a little hint of this lighter color. Now, looking at it from further away, I feel like I need to add more shadows to the bottom right portion. So let's go back to, this time let's try the sketching tool. I'm just going to go in with a pencil. So under the sketching, technical pencil, it's probably a little bit modified, but realistically, you know, same tool. The main things that I modify is the way that the tilt mechanics work. I don't like tilt too much. It's very inconsistent for my liking. So yeah, here we hit the outer edges a bit more. Shade on the inside a little bit. Shade on the inside here too. If your edges are too rough, you can always use the smudge tool. Again, try not to over smudge it. You lose all texture. Your drawing begins to look like it's out of focus, like it's floaty. You don't want that. Unless you do, then, you know, more power to you. Alright, now almost done here. Alright, so this step, right? Let's quickly recap. What did we do? So we filled in the color, let's say with blue, whatever color of our liquid will be. After that, what we take is we grab the actual color of the object below the liquid, and we start to add it into the liquid color. Then you grab a darker version of the color from the object, in this case being the darker purple or pink, and you apply it to the base right here. So remember, pink color goes here over the blue, then the darker color applied to the bottom because the lighting is coming from there. Then we've got highlights because of the see-throughness on the edges. If we had a green background, like if we had leaves which went, you know, like this, then the parts that were here would have a little bit of that green showing through, right? So you have to keep in mind what's behind the object as well. And then we applied highlights to where the sun would hit, right? So you got some sparkles here, here, a little bit along there, and there you go. And when it's a hanging object, like the little drool snot thing, you know, if it's wrapping around something, show some of that darker color in there, right? So we have the variation. If I toggle it on and off, look, even though it distorts because of me painting over it, right? I don't have the exact view of what's underneath. Even though I'm distorting the ear, the darker portion of the ear, it's great because water distorts how light reflects to stuff. So yeah, now it looks like he has a wet ear. And we can compare that to this version. As you can see, the most important difference between the two is the added shadow. So this would be my approach, this would be the quick approach. If I want to improve the quick approach, I would unlock the layer, probably create a new layer just to be safe, and airbrush in a darker part of the water. So if I was to airbrush it in, I guess this could be considered the quick approach instead of the other approach, right? Then I would grab an eraser and I would erase all the edges up to the shadow point. The reason that I wouldn't keep some of those shadow points is it might cover up some texture or something like that. So I don't know if you worked on any texture, you know, you might want to do exactly as I do, but if you feel like it looks fine even without erasing the outer shadows, then feel free to not erase them. So yeah, basically now we've added a little bit of shadows. So here you can see them. I'll tone them down somewhat. Yeah, and then you know, if you do your highlights in a similar way, your end result would most likely be pretty good. So this is how I would do water. As you can see, a little bit less colorless this way with the first technique, the quicker technique, where you just lower the opacity. But with this technique, you pick up more color because you're still using a full fill and you're just sampling colors. You can be mixing colors in if you'd want. So I don't know, enjoy yourself, you know, play around with the different colors. You could grab this pink, or you can grab a much lighter pink and see how the end result, you know, works. Is the liquid a really light substance? You know, it might capture more light and make the color underneath lighter, or is it a darker substance? So it's a lot to think about. But basically, guys, this is how I would draw a wet object. In terms of actual water, we can cover that in another tutorial. It might be fun just to keep the video somewhat relatively short length, you know, reasonable length. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys learned something. If you didn't, if you disagree with the process, or if you found anything that you can improve on, be sure to leave a comment. I read those and I try to answer as best as I can. And thanks again for everything, and I'll see you next time. Bye.